So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Managing Changes in Cognition webinar with Molly and Natalie. My name is Jordan and I work in client services with Parkinson Association of Alberta, and I will be the moderator for this webinar in addition to Colleen out of our Red Deer office. Molly and Natalie are occupational therapy students who recently completed a 7-week placement with Parkinson Association of Alberta. Occupational therapists are fantastic resources and can help people living with Parkinson disease manage changes in their cognition, which is a common symptom of PD. Cognitive challenges can make daily activities like keeping track of appointments, managing medications, or following steps in a recipe difficult. In this webinar, Molly and Natalie will discuss strategies for managing challenges with memory, attention, and other thinking skills. If you have any questions during this webinar, please submit them in the chat below. At the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat blurb icon. Click it and the chat will appear on the right-hand side. You can send your questions out to the whole group or just to the panelists with the drop-down arrow. As a disclaimer, this webinar will be recorded. All information provided in the videos by Parkinson Association and the featured speaker is furnished strictly for educational and entertainment purposes only. This service is not intended to be diagnostic, prescriptive, or replace the relationship, advice, and/or care of your physician. General questions about symptoms, treatments, available medications, complementary and alternative healthcare therapies, and current research will be fielded. I will now turn it over to Molly and Natalie to get us started.
Thank you, Jordan. So good morning. My name is Nathalie Klinger, and presenting alongside me today is Molly Beauregard. And we are both occupational therapy students in the Masters of Occupational Therapy program at the U of A. And as Jordan mentioned, we both just completed one of our clinical placements at the Parkinson Association of Alberta, which was a wonderful learning experience for both of us. And today we will be discussing how to manage changes in cognition that can happen as a result of Parkinson's disease. So what is cognition? Cognition refers to the mental abilities used to process and apply information. It involves many different areas, such as thinking, problem solving, memory, planning, learning, and more. These cognitive abilities help us to perform daily activities, such as paying attention during a conversation, remembering where we put our keys, and managing busy schedules and appointments. So how does Parkinson's disease affect cognition? We know that PD is not purely a motor disorder. There are also many non-motor symptoms that can affect an individual's thinking, behavior, autonomic function, and sensory function. The experience of cognitive changes varies widely with PD. For some, changes can be mild, and they may notice slowed thinking or general forgetfulness. For others, the changes can impact problem solving, planning, or visuospatial function, which we'll get into later. The exact cause of cognitive impairment in PD is not currently fully understood. Researchers believe that changes to brain chemicals, such as the neurotransmitters dopamine, acetylcholine, serotonin, norepinephrine, damage pathways of information being sent in the brain. In addition, it is thought that changes to brain cells, such as the formation of Lewy bodies, can cause cell death or damage to the brain.
While PD itself does have an impact on cognition, there are also other coexisting factors which may be causing some of the changes alongside PD. Many individuals with PD may experience depression at some point during their illness progression. Some may experience changes in their cognition, such as slowed thinking, forgetfulness, or difficulty concentrating. Sleep disturbances are also common in PD, whether it is difficulty falling asleep, muscle stiffness at night, REM sleep behavior disorder, or due to side effects of medications. This can lead to difficulty sustaining attention, judgment impairment, and reduced alertness. Often, we think about fatigue in terms of the effect on physical abilities, but it can also have an impact on the speed of thinking and ability to recall information. Orthostatic hypotension is the drop in blood pressure that may occur when moving from sitting or lying to standing. This can contribute to foggy thinking and memory problems. Stress can also have a large impact on cognitive abilities, specifically executive function, such as planning or problem solving. And finally, there are various changes which take place in the brain over time, and these may lead to changes in areas such as memory or attention as well. So what is occupational therapy, and why are we well positioned to help those with cognitive challenges? Occupational therapists help clients to continue participating in the activities that they find meaningful. So if meaningful activities are being impacted by cognitive difficulties, OTs can problem solve adaptations and strategies to make the activity easier to perform. There are 4 main areas of cognition which we will talk about today. They are attention, memory, executive function, and visual spatial function. First, we will talk about attention. Attention is the ability to focus on an aspect of one's environment, often while needing to tune out other competing distractions. There are 3 main types of attention that we often talk about. The first is sustained attention. This is the ability to focus on something for long periods of time without being distracted. This would be what you are all doing right now, listening to me talk. Divided attention is when you focus on 2 or more things at the same time. For example, if you are driving and listening to the radio. And then there is alternating attention. This involves shifting your focus and switching between multiple tasks. This could look like reading the newspaper, asking your spouse a question, and then going back to the newspaper again. So how can attention be affected with PD? You may find multitasking difficult, such as talking and walking at the same time. Staying focused on the details of a book or conversation can become challenging, or completing tasks where your attention needs to switch back and forth, like while cooking a recipe. Now we are going to talk about memory. Memory is the ability to store, recall, and retain information. There are different ways we can categorize memory. There is short-term memory, which is remembering things that have happened in the past few minutes to days, or long-term memory, which is remembering things from the past few weeks to years. We can also think about memory in terms of retrospective memory, which is remembering things that have happened in the past, or prospective memory, which is remembering to remember things in the future. So this would be something like remembering to take your medication before going to bed. So how can memory be affected by PD? Commonly in PD, short-term memory is impacted more so than long-term memory. This means that learning new information can become difficult. Things like remembering a recent conversation can be challenging, or remembering whether you took your morning medication.
Okay, now we will talk a bit about executive function. So executive function is the management system of our brain. It refers to our ability to plan, organize, initiate, and regulate goal-directed behavior. Some people like to think about executive function as the conductor of an orchestra. Just as the conductor manages, directs, and integrates the musicians in the orchestra, executive function does the same with various brain operations. Without a conductor, an orchestra can still make music, but it would not sound nearly as fluid or beautiful. Some examples of what executive functioning help us to do are planning and initiating tasks. This involves organizing information and making decisions. Regulating behavior. This involves something called inhibitory control. Inhibitory control is our ability to stop ourselves from impulses or strong desires in order to choose more appropriate behaviors. And problem solving. This involves flexible thinking, which is our ability to think of multiple approaches to solving a problem. As you can see, executive function is important for accomplishing the things that we want and need to do in our daily lives. So how can it be affected? Executive function abilities can be impacted as Parkinson's disease progresses. Individuals may find that planning and executing a task, such as preparing a dinner with multiple dishes, to be difficult. Problem solving can become challenging, such as knowing how to respond if you're on a Zoom meeting and it stops working. Initiating a task can be challenging, such as getting dressed in the morning. People who struggle with executive dysfunction may find themselves becoming more impulsive, such as making a comment at an inappropriate time. Visual spatial function refers to our ability to process and interpret visual information about where things are in space. Examples include figure ground discrimination, which is the ability to tell the difference between an object and the surface it is on, or that an object in the foreground is closer to us compared to an object in the background. Visual spatial function also helps us navigate spaces, whether that be in our homes or a busy supermarket. It also includes being able to identify an object by seeing it. Visual spatial function helps us to safely interact with our environment. Changes in contrast sensitivity can make it difficult to differentiate between objects that are similar in color, such as rice on a white plate. Challenges with visual spatial processing and perception can lead to difficulty managing spaces, even ones that are familiar to us. Visual spatial issues can contribute to illusions as well, especially in situations of low light. And illusions are misperceptions of visual information. So for example, I may interpret a pile of clothes on a chair in my bedroom when there's not a whole lot of light as being a dog, even though it's a pile of clothing.
So now we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about certain strategies that you can use for some of these cognitive challenges. So if you are having difficulty with maintaining your attention, we would suggest avoiding overstimulating, distracting environments. Loud noises, bright lights, and cluttered areas can make it difficult to focus on the task at hand. Reducing visual distractors can also be helpful. For example, working on a computer with multiple tabs open, it can be difficult to focus on the one thing that you need to get done. Controlling the rate of incoming information. This can be done by asking others to slow down. Writing things down can also be a helpful strategy, as this provides an opportunity to reprocess the information you have received at a later time. Using checklists for tasks, especially ones with multiple steps where your attention may stray, and minimizing multitasking. You want to keep focused on one thing at a time. Now, there are two types of memory strategies we often talk about, and they are external and internal memory aids. External aids are tools which help compensate for memory impairment. Internal aids are behaviors or techniques designed to assist with recall of information. Internal aids can be helpful, but may be more difficult to learn, and they do require a certain amount of practice and cognitive ability to be able to use effectively. So one of the external aids we would suggest is making sure that important items have a home. For example, always placing your keys in the same spot in your house, such as a hook or a dish by the front door. Labeling drawers and cabinets to reduce the chance of buying multiples of items or spending extra time and energy searching for items can be useful. Making sure that there is a place for everything and everything is in its place. Keeping medications in a pill box and making sure you have a set time every week to refill. reducing clutter in your home to make it easier to find things, and trying to schedule appointments at the same time each day. Keeping a consistent routine can prevent missed appointments. On this slide here, we see an example of a well-organized set of drawers, and then a pill box there so that you can keep track of your medications. So a continuation of some of those external memory aids would be the use of written planning systems. Tools such as calendars, planners, and notebooks can be helpful for keeping track of schedules or taking note of important information. It is best to use a simple, well-organized system. We need to develop a habit of checking the planner daily. So whether that be right when you wake up in the morning or right before you go to bed, just making sure that it's consistent from day to day. Using a whiteboard can also be a helpful strategy. This is similar to the planner or the notebook, but it is a large visual representation of our schedule. Computer-based planning systems are also really great, especially something like Google Calendar that can link between your devices. Using apps, so setting timers and reminders, can be especially important for safety, such as in the kitchen. Post-it notes are another great way to make little reminders for yourself, but we want to make sure we're leaving it in a noticeable position, such as the inside of the front door to remind you what items to take when leaving the home. And again, checklists can be helpful for memory challenges as well. So having everything written out that you need to do in your morning routine or something like a grocery list. So we can see here the large planner on the wall, the whiteboard on the wall. We have a checklist and then a post-it note as well. Now here are some of the internal strategies. So the first one we like to talk about is paying attention to important tasks. Attention is an important factor in the successful encoding of memory. So telling yourself or even saying out loud something like, I am putting my keys in my pocket. If you are doing something that you know is maybe a little bit out of routine or you may not remember later, directly putting attention onto that behavior helps make it a little bit easier to remember in the future. We also talk about rehearsal and repetition of information. So by repeating information, what we are doing is strengthening the recall connections in our brain. Think back to learning multiplication tables and practicing over and over again. The more you use those circuits in your brain, the better the chances that you'll be able to remember it later on. Another technique that we talk about is chunking. This means organizing or grouping separate pieces of information together. For instance, breaking down your grocery list into smaller pieces of information. So rather than trying to remember the whole list at once, breaking it into sections such as meats, fruits and vegetables, and dairy. And then there is the strategy of making associations. So this involves relating what you want to learn with something that you already know. For example, when you are learning someone's name, it can be helpful to associate that person with someone with the same name, whether that be a friend or someone famous. You are making stronger connections between the information you want to learn and already stored information. Many of you have probably heard about creating mnemonics before. Mnemonics are techniques for remembering information that is otherwise difficult to recall. The idea behind using mnemonics is to encode complex information in a way that is much easier to remember. So a common technique is to create acronyms, which are words made up of the first letter of other words. For example, Roy G. Biv to remember the colors of the spectrum. And the last internal memory strategy that we talk about is visual imagery. So we suggest trying to incorporate all 5 senses when you are trying to use this technique. For example, if you need to stop in at the grocery store and pick up a loaf of bread, pasta sauce, and a Caesar salad on your way home, you would visualize yourself walking into the store, walking down to the bakery section, picking up the bread, walking over to the produce area, grabbing your salad, and then walking over to the canned sauces aisle and putting the tomato sauce into your cart. You want to incorporate as much detail as possible into the visualization, thinking about the bright lights of the store, the smell of the bakery section, the music that is playing in the background, and the feeling of pushing the cart.
All right, so now we'll talk about some strategies for executive functioning challenges. So remember that executive functioning is the management system of the brain, which involves planning, problem solving, decision making, and regulating behavior. Basically, all of the stuff that's developed in your teenage years. So the following are some strategies for helping a person who may have challenges with this area of cognitive function. So keeping a routine for daily activities. Having a regular routine is really helpful as it takes a lot of the planning and decision-making out of day-to-day life. Breaking down activities into simple steps. So before doing a task, try planning it out. So for example, if I want to make a bowl of cereal, I should think through the steps and maybe even say out loud. First, I'm going to put a bowl, a spoon, cereal, and milk on the counter. Then I'll put the cereal in the bowl, then pour milk into the bowl, then put the milk away, then sit down and eat my cereal. And yeah, even saying that out loud to yourself or describing it to your care partner who's in the room, that can help you plan ahead. And allow yourself to take breaks if you need. For example, if you are reading a newspaper article and you are finding it difficult to understand or hard to focus on, mark where you stopped with a pen or pencil, then take a stroll around the house or go and do something else and come back to it later. If you are doing an activity that is difficult, it can be helpful to plan in advance for what problems may arise. So for example, if I'm planning on going shopping for clothing and I'm a little worried about it, I can think about, okay, what will happen if I can't find something? Well, in that case, I'll ask a sales associate for help. Or what if I'm trying something on and I need a different size? In that case, I can ask the change room attendant to get me a different size. Or if I'm at the till and I'm paying, but the credit card isn't working, I can either use a different credit card or pay with cash. So kind of problem solving in advance can often take a bit of the stress and worry out of situations. And when problem solving, identify possible solutions, weigh pros and cons, and ask for help if you need it. There's no shame in that. As Molly said before in our memory section, it can be really useful to have checklists or easy to read instructions on the wall for activities that maybe are a little challenging or hard to remember or think through. So you could have a checklist for leaving the house, and items on this checklist could include, did I turn off the stove or the curling iron or any other hot thing that needs to be turned off? Do I have my keys? Do I have my wallet? Do I have my phone? Do I have my medication? Have I taken my medication? And is the cat or the dog inside? Something like that. So here is an example of general instructions for making a meal. So if I'm having trouble remembering the order of what to do when making a meal, I can have instructions like this one on one of my kitchen cupboards. So this is really general, but just kind of helps prompt you to think about all the different steps. So I'll read them out. First, you've got to read the recipe. Second, put all the ingredients on the counter. Third, preheat the oven if required. Then wash and chop vegetables. Prepare vegetables and or meat. Cook the food. Prepare the sauce or dressing, usually while the food is cooking. take out the food, turn off the oven, put the food on a plate, and then enjoy. So that's just an example. All right, here are some other strategies. So it can be difficult to swap attention from one activity to another if you are having challenges with executive functioning. Giving yourself plenty of time to transition between activities, such as moving from reading a book to heading out the door for an appointment, can be really helpful. And as was mentioned before, avoiding multitasking is really a good thing to keep in mind, especially when doing something challenging. So if you're cooking dinner, instead of listening to the radio while you're doing it, maybe focusing solely on making the dinner and making sure things are prepared, different dishes are prepared on time and all that. So we all have to do cognitively demanding tasks from time to time, but trying to do these tasks during medication, like on periods with medication, or when you're at your most alert. So yeah, it's much harder to do these things when medication is wearing off or if you're tired. So maybe if answering emails is something that's a bit cognitively demanding, maybe doing that in the morning when you're the most alert or when your medications are at their peak. As we mentioned earlier, stress makes executive functioning more difficult. Try to keep stress to a minimum by only taking on as much as you can, asking for help when you need it, and spreading out stressful or demanding tasks throughout the day or the week. And sometimes this is easier said than done, but it can really have an impact on cognition. And remember that lack of sleep can also impact cognitive function. Try to prioritize getting a good night's rest. And if you are having trouble getting asleep or staying asleep, talk to your healthcare team. All right, let's talk about some strategies for visual spatial function challenges. So remember that visual spatial functioning is our ability to kind of determine where things are in space. So when it is affected, it can be difficult to differentiate between things that are of a similar color. Using high contrast items to help differentiate between items and surfaces can be really helpful. So for example, you could use dishes that are a color not normally the same color as our food. So having dishes that are light blue, that way you'll be able to see clearly your food against the dish and not have that situation where it's like the white rice against the white plate and it's hard to see. Or if you're having difficulty finding your keys when you place them on your gray countertop, having a neon orange keychain can help it so that it pops and doesn't just blend into that surface. When possible, try to avoid low light situations, as these can make visual misperceptions or illusions, as we spoke about before, more common. And just as a reminder, illusions are when we misperceive some sort of stimuli, such as visual information. Also important to have well-lit hallways and rooms to make navigating around the home easier and easier to see obstacles. And speaking of, keeping floors clear of clutter, or at least having clutter-free pathways throughout the home, can be extremely helpful, as issues with visual spatial functioning can make it difficult to avoid obstacles in the environment. So just taking that hazard away is a really good idea. Try to keep your work areas, whether that's a desk, kitchen counter, table, etc., free from visual distractions, as this makes focusing on a task easier. And as Molly mentioned in a previous section, putting things in the same spot always, as best you can, making sure everything has a home and keeping things in that spot, reduces the need for looking around for an item. People who have challenges with visual spatial function often find navigating spaces to be difficult. To make it easier on yourself, use the same route to get to destinations. If you routinely go to your neighborhood coffee shop, walk the same route to get there every time. In the same vein, if you have make sure you have a designated grocery store, pharmacy, library, or etc. This will take away the challenge of constantly needing to navigate a new and unfamiliar environment. If you are someone who enjoys walking for fun or fitness, try to only go for walks in places you are familiar with, as this will lessen the chance of you getting lost. And when you are out and about, make sure to keep your phone on you. If you have a smartphone, it can be really great to have Google Maps or another navigation application on your phone that you can use if you get lost or turned around. Also, having a phone is helpful because then if you do find yourself getting lost or just needing some help, you can give a call to one of your loved ones. And on this next page, we just have some examples of what we spoke about. So the picture that's in the top left corner, that's showing what we would call a high contrast placemat. So that red placemat really makes the plate and the cutlery pop, so we can really see the difference between them. And then we've got a lamp there just to remind everyone that it's important to have well-lit rooms in the house to avoid those illusions, and also just to make navigating easier. And then on the top right, that's a picture of Google Maps or another type of navigation app showing how it can lead you from where you are to your destination and help give you a bit of guidance if you're getting lost.
So we have spoken about the strategies that an individual can use to manage cognitive challenges. However, there are also strategies that care partners can put into place as well. If your loved one is having trouble communicating, avoid open-ended questions. Instead, give choices. Are you hungry, thirsty, or tired? Alternatively, ask questions that require yes or no answers. We want to keep communication clear. Limit background noise, face your partner, and ensure that you have adequate lighting. Allow your loved one extra time for processing information, word searching, and participating in the conversation. Encourage your loved one to stay involved physically, mentally, and socially. And of course, take time to care for yourself. There are many complicated feelings which may arise while caring for someone with cognitive challenges. Giving yourself time to process and communicate any loss or grief you may feel is important.
Finally, we'll go over some tips for just general brain health. So we like to say that what is good for your heart is good for your brain. Exercise promotes blood flow to the brain, which brings oxygen and nutrients to the brain, helping your brain stay healthy and function well. Exercise has been shown to even make brain cells use dopamine more effectively. And exercise promotes neuroplasticity because it releases brain growth factors, which help neurons grow more connections, strengthening the networks in the brain. So doing any sort of physical exercise can be good. It doesn't have to be something super strenuous, even going for regular walks or doing a bit of soft yoga, that's excellent. Engaging in mentally stimulating activities can strengthen connections in your brain networks as well, making the brain work more efficiently. So anything like board games, reading a book, learning a new skill, or teaching someone a new skill, these are all great things. And socializing and having conversations counts as mentally stimulating activity, as it requires us to remember what we are discussing and it makes us think on our feet. And also socialization is just great for general mental health and wellness. Another thing you can do is incorporating brain games and challenges into your regular routine. And that can look like many different things. So consider summarizing a news story that you read in the paper or hear on the radio to a loved one, or playing 20 questions at the dinner table, or other kind of brain games that challenge you a bit more to think on your feet and use your memory. And here we have some resources if you're interested in learning more. We got a lot of our information from the American Parkinson Disease Association. And as well, there's a really great guide on the Parkinson's Foundation about cognition. And we've mentioned a few programs here at the PAA. We've got support programming, and there's that thinking, memory, and concentration program. And now we'll have some questions.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. That was a incredibly informative presentation, and there's a lot of fantastic tips and tricks in there that I think people will find incredibly useful. We did have a question come through. Is the person with Parkinson's aware of these cognitive changes that are happening?
I think Molly can add to this as well, but I think this really depends on where the person is at in their disease progression. Like often if it's just they're experiencing some forgetfulness, they'll often be quite aware of that. But if they've moved in kind of into the dementia stage, which happens later for some people, not everyone, but in that case, they might not be as aware.
Right. I would just add on that, yeah, what Natalie is saying, memory is maybe a little bit more obvious, especially that initial stage of maybe word finding is a little bit tricky. You're having trouble remembering things from conversations. They might be aware of that. But then when it gets to some of those more advanced, those executive functioning skills, that can be a little bit harder to notice. So it might be more the loved ones that are noticing those kind of changes. But of course, it varies just like with everything else in PD. So from person to person, it will be different.
Yeah, and if someone is aware, and we call that having insight, then they can use more of those internal strategies that Molly spoke about during the memory section. So things like using mnemonics. What were some of the other good ones? Chunking was another one. But if they are not aware, then maybe, yeah, in that case, the loved one or the care partner would then be helping the person with PD by, you know, setting reminders on their phone or making sure the use of a calendar is happening, that sort of thing.
Okay, perfect. I think to expand on that question, they were wondering about visual spatial issues. Would they be aware that they are encountering those challenges, or would that be along the same vein as you had mentioned?
Yeah, I think it really depends.
No worries. Perfect.
Yeah, I would just add, like maybe for this one, you would notice if you might notice, but your care partner might see things like you're bumping into objects a little more often, you're getting routes that you typically used to know, maybe you can't remember as well anymore. So things like that, you might not know that that's visual spatial, but those are kind of signs you would want to be looking out for as a care partner.
Okay, perfect. Another question that we had come through: how many years after initial diagnosis of PD do cognitive abilities start to deteriorate?
I think this is another one that is just so variable. We can't really give you a a solid answer on that. It just kind of depends on the person. I'd say it happens maybe later in the disease progression than some of the earlier signs like tremors and postural instability.
Right. Yeah, again, it varies so much, but for a lot of people, you might be noticing some of just those mild changes even before you get the official diagnosis. So some of that word finding, the memory, the attention, some of those more subtle changes might be happening, but yeah, there's not an exact, 10 years in or 5 years in. It just, yeah, can be so variable.
All right, fantastic. Somebody else was wanting to know if you knew of any good resources for neuroplasticity studies or new findings in the area.
I'm not so sure about that one. Yeah, I think a lot of our information was coming from the Parkinson Foundation, which is out of the United States. But that was relying on things that, yeah, have been known for some time now.
Yeah, I think in regards to neuroplasticity, what we normally just talk about is we know that the thing that works is exercise for sure. Can increase that. So that's normally what is suggested, but anything really current, we would have to look into a little bit more.
Okay, perfect. One more question for you guys. Are there any certain markers or milestones that care partners should be looking for in their partners' cognition levels before they bring it to the healthcare team? Yeah.
So we always want to look at things in terms of safety. So, I mean, you can bring it to the healthcare team at any point as soon as you notice any sort of changes, but we would definitely be looking at things, especially things in the kitchen. That's when we want to start to get involved, and we're worried about forgetting to leave the stove on, things like that, where there's more of a danger factor is definitely something you would want to look out for.
And yeah, as Molly said, like, we would encourage you to bring any concerns you have to your healthcare team. Like, as soon as you notice them, the better, the earlier, the better, because then you can start problem solving with your doctor and with your other, healthcare team members.
Okay, perfect. There was a question, just wondering if there would be a recorded version of the presentation for attendees. And yes, this webinar is recorded and will be uploaded to our Parkinson Association YouTube channel either later this week or early next week. So stay tuned for that. But that's all the questions that we've received. So I want to thank you both again so much for taking the time to give this presentation and sharing your knowledge. I know that it will go far with a lot of people. I also want to thank everybody who attended the webinar today for attending live and asking your questions. Our next webinar is scheduled for June, so be sure to stay tuned for more information on that. But if you're looking for any more information, it is available on our website, parkinsonassociation.ca, and we do have previous recorded webinars available on our YouTube channel. So that's it for today. I will wrap it up here, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. All right. Take care, everybody.